Okay, so this talk is application sandboxing. Run your apps on any Linux distribution, no batteries required. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Sri Ramakrishna. I'm part of the GNOME Old Farts group because I've been part of this project since 1997, and I've been involved doing PR, public relations, engagement, all that kind of stuff. And it's, it is what it is. Sometimes there's ups and downs. I think most people understand a lot of things that GNOME sometimes gets itself in trouble. So my work is sometimes cut out for me. One other great interesting thing is, for me, this is sort of coming back home. The first public presentation I've ever done and talk at an open source conference was here at LinuxFest Northwest in 2011. And so that was the time when GNOME 3 was released. So it's the first time I was doing public speaking, and it was the first time I was thinking I might get into a hostile audience because we changed a lot of stuff and people might be mad. But it wasn't. It worked out great, and I had a really good time. And since then, I've been going all over the country and the globe giving talks. And so I'd really like to thank LinuxFest Northwest for starting me on talking at conferences. So, all right. So given having the introduction out of the way, so I thought I'll start off with what is application sandboxing and our application runtime. Now, people might think this might be a technical talk. It's not. It's a social talk. It's what people don't know is we're planning to change the world, and we're planning to change the whole paradigm. We're going for a paradigm shift, and application sandboxing and runtime is one of those pieces. So, like a drop in the water, it ripples out. So let's start with application sandboxing. Application sandboxing is the idea that you can run an application and have a control of what it accesses. So running in a sandbox, that means what devices I have access to, whether I have access to the display, do I have access to the network, what parts of the file system, the disk, all of that. That's sandboxing. We want to make sure you're safe. Make sure the application can't do anything it's not supposed to. The runtime is this idea, this environment that is static, that has all the pieces it needs to run the application. So that's essentially what it is. So it's a pocket universe that I take around with me. And you can run with this universe. You can run your application any distro. It doesn't matter if you're running Arch Linux, which is my favorite. If you're using OpenSUSE, Fedora, it doesn't matter. You can run it anywhere. And the social change that comes from that, people don't realize there's a social change that comes with that. And I'll tell you a little. You'll find out as I go forward. So what's so great about it? What is great about having a runtime or sandbox system? Well, if you're a free software enthusiast, getting involved becomes a lot easier. Projects like GNOME, which is old and mature, we really have a huge code base. And if you ever tried to build GNOME from source, it is a nail-biting experience. It has been for a while. And I have spent entire weekends scratching my head trying to get GNOME to build so that I can do something. And if you're a weekend warrior, that gets hard. You only have a certain amount of time, and then you waste your weekend. Well, I haven't gotten anywhere because I'm too busy trying to doing the build. So onboarding becomes really easier, and you can participate in free software and be able to participate without having the overhead of having to build from source. And also don't have to deal with the idiosyncrasies of every distro. What's so great about the user? They get a consistent application user experience. That means that application is going to behave the same in every distro you run it. So it may not, sometimes you may see like this application runs this way fine, but it doesn't run on this one. So people will be like, oh, well, it works on this, it doesn't work on that. Consistent experience. Developer. Now, one of the things is that you get to know how popular your application is. So if you're treating your application and it can run anywhere, you can host it on you control distribution. You can run it off your website. You know how many people are downloading it. You have a personal experience with your users, with your customers. So you have an understanding of how popular your applications are. Because if it's hidden behind a distro, you're never going to know who's using it. You don't have a personal connection. So, on that note, what's the distro focus model today? Bug databases. Okay, just to throw off something. Sometimes applications have bugs that are just specific for that distro. And I know in the past you would have all these bugs from different distros. Sometimes they get upstream, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're very specific. Those kinds, it gets a little connection, sometimes it gets a little nuts. Again, I told you about having a personal relationship with your users. Other things distros do, they'll modify your software, maybe built in a different way that was not intended. So, you know, there's things that distros can do to your software that may not be consistent or how you intended. So in a runtime focus model, we have the pieces coming together to form like an app store. Already, GNOME software is moving to an app store model, and there are already distros that are moving behind it. And once you have that centralization, you're able to. For instance, GNOME software today can update your firmware. We've demonstrated being able to upgrade from Fedora 23 to Fedora 24 continually inside GNOME software. So now the next step is being able to offer applications. Well, if you're able to offer applications, you're able to have a relationship with your users. Maybe you'll be able to find a way to have them donate or do some way to support your application and build a community behind it. And sadly, you don't have to deal with packaging choices. You know, everybody, if you go and say, well, if you go to a lot of places that are distributing their own apps, you'll be like, well, here's one for RPM, here's one for Debian, and here's a tarball. You don't have to do any of that. One application runs everywhere. Well, so distro's all bad? No, it's not. I mean, distros have a really great role. Not every developer has the resources to do all parts of development, right? If you are a hobbyist programmer and there was a CVE against something, well, a distro will jump right on it and they will fix it within less than 24 hours because it's a CVE, but not your hobbyist. They may not be able to react that fast. So there's definitely a good reason to have a choice to let the distro distribute your applications. But I guess there's a limit to how far you want to do that. But the other great thing about distros is they create a smooth user experience. Behind all that chaos, behind the development, the distros present a uniform experience, a beautiful QA'd experience that you're not. He doesn't believe it. Anyway, but it does a beautiful experience that irons out the wrinkles. Not maybe all of them, Adam, but Some of them. I mean, there'd be some consistency. But as I said, there's a certain time that maybe we need to expose those things and get the application ecosystem done correctly. Is it just desktops that we're interested in? No. We can do this is applicable to anything, all right? A runtime technology can go beyond desktop. If you're remember, a runtime is a static environment that you can run your applications on. Well, at some point, if you were trying to create an application that you want to support for 10 years or anything like that, well, they're static, so you can keep them running for a long time. But also, there's ways to update them in a controlled manner. So it's not just desktop, and you shouldn't think that. It's a runtime. It doesn't attach anything to anything. It's actually it can be anything you want. It's just a collection of libraries and binaries put together. So, how does runtime work? And why this runtime or this runtime technology? All right. So, it's like a container. I'm sure you've gone to a lot of open source conferences. Containers are all the rage, right? Everybody see Docker this, container that. You know, even when we talk about sandbox applications, if you're going to a Linux Foundation conference or anything, they talk about sandbox applications. They talk about it in using Docker. So, why Docker or Linux containers versus what GNOME is doing? Well, first of all, Docker runs as root, right? So if you're trying to create something where you want to control access to devices. If they're running as root, it's much harder to prevent access when it's running already at a privileged state. So we don't want to do that. So that's why it was better to run it as a user space and maybe work towards creating some ways with the kernel people kernel developers to do security context. And so if you do that, then using our technology, we can actually enforce safety. Is that? Where am I? Sorry. So no worries, because my phone beeped too. That's why. So anyway, that's why we are making the argument that our runtime technology is the right time and place for what we want to do. So what does this technology contain? So the first one is something we call OS tree, which you can kind of think of it as Git for a tree of binaries. OS tree manages, as I said, a tree of binaries and has a whole set of ways to update them. The important thing it updates is atomically. So that means you can update a whole tree of binaries safely. And that's one of the things we do a lot of, right? If you're updating components in a runtime, you want to make sure they do it in a safe manner. And the atomic part of that update is a very important aspect of that. In fact, OS tree is used internally a lot. In fact, it was conceived as a way to do something called GNOME continuous. So one of the things that really kind of gives GNOME a sort of a big leg up is the idea of continuous integration, right? You see that a lot too, right? Especially among GitHub, you know, Facebook and Microsoft and all these people have been always talking about continuous integration, right? You can see on GitHub all the checks, things like that. We have it too, and we are. Because we have continuous integration, we have a much higher quality in our software because we have to make sure that everything is always in a buildable state. So if something breaks, we're going to have to fix it. And so the quality of the software goes up because we have a continuous system. And if you're providing a runtime or an SDK kit, well, you got to make sure that's always available. So discipline. The other thing we have is xdg-app, which is the main interface to the runtime. And you'll see how xdg-app is used further down in the slides. But that is the main way you're going to interact with the runtime. So I was thinking demo, but there is no way I'm going to do a demo in work in progress software because demoitis. So I'm going to show a series of screenshots that kind of shows how this thing works. All right. So the first one is we're just getting a GPG key. We just shows up, download the GPG key. That kind of just tells us who we are and making sure we're downloading the right content, or we trust the content. So once you do that, now one thing you'll notice is it sort of looks a little bit like Git. Especially if you've used it before and you're trying to pull sources from it, and that is you'll find that there's a lot of the same kind of thing there. So again, you add a remote source from nightly build. So we're building from the nightly build system. So every day we are building, well, every day, many times a day, we're building GNOME. And so now we're kind of tapping into the runtime system that's being built. So you add that source, then we then install the platform. Now this is the great magic, right? Instead of spending a weekend downloading all the sources or using some build system and try to compile all the components, 54 seconds later, you got the entire GNOME platform ready to run. Now there's a SDK kit as well, which is probably longer, but still, you have a platform ready to go in 54 seconds. So now you have a platform. What are you going to do with it? Well, we also build apps. And one of the things we like to build, and one of the things that's part of the core applications is GNOME Weather. And so using this, we download GNOME Weather. Again, 10 seconds later. We run it using, you can't see it, but it just says xdg-app run GNOME Weather. And now you have the latest GNOME Weather application built. So now you can QA it, you can test it, you can play around with it, you can file bugs against it. So now we've made it so much easier to look at where the project is at one time. So we've got rid of the complexity and hopefully lower the barrier of being able to read apps, to build an app and test it out. The other great thing is that what was I going to say about that one? But like I said, you get the latest stuff. It's pretty cool. Now it looks like it maybe I gave you a series of command line stuff, but it's not gonna. You don't have to do all those things. GNOME software is going to handle all of that for you. You just throw it at that URL I showed earlier, and you can download all and install all of the latest applications, the unstable applications, easily, with using the same UI you would use anything else. So I kind of went past it in order. So this slide is a little redundant, but it's the same thing. We're making things easier. Man, I went through all of those slides and talked through the whole thing. But anyway, again, testers, users, QA, and so forth. Final thoughts. So I kind of want to leave you with something to take back after you're done. right now runtime systems are right on desktops. But there's nothing that says it's tied to desktops or anything. So you can create an entire marketplace of runtimes. Its relevancy is actually more than desktops, because for instance, if you wanted, I don't know, give me an example. Let's say you're writing a mathematical program. Well, we can provide a runtime that has optimized libraries for, let's say, ARM or Intel x86 platforms architectures. So now you can create particular applications with this runtime. So you can create whole marketplaces of things that we can offer, and it doesn't have to be just GNOME. And in fact, we are doing a KDE runtime. So you're not just having to do with GNOME or anything else. We're actually doing KDE as well. So you can build KDE apps using this runtime. So there's a whole new world. That's why I was saying the paradigm changes, because once these things change, how we develop applications, how we run applications starts changing, and then the culture starts changing. That's why I say it's a game changer. That's why it's so interesting. So right now, if you go to conferences, you don't hear much about desktops, right? And part of the reason I'm here is to show that desktops are relevant entities in free and open source software. I know it's really easy to get lost in all these other technologies like OpenStack and containers and all these things. I know they're very relevant, and maybe the desktops are moving off towards the other edges. But one thing we should all keep in mind and why desktops are so important, and that is that we are user space engineers. Every Linux system has something we put in there. Dbus comes from GNOME. KHTML became Blink after several iterations. I mean, you're all using those technologies, and they came from desktops. And the other thing is, if we depend on something, it's going to show up on every distribution. GNOME right now, the runtimes, GNOME is the default for most distributions. It is the default for almost all the enterprise distributions. So, we are going to be able to create this runtime system. It is going to be widely available as part of GNOME. So, I like to do some QA. How much time do we have? It's 2:08, 2:10. So, I think we have till 2:30, something like that.
You got lots of time.
Huh?
You got lots of time. Yeah.
All right, cool, good, because I thought we would spend some of that time discussing desktops, our positioning. Please.
So when you create an app for GNOME or KDE, is the code largely the same as if you created that specifically for it? I mean, does it look like a GNOME app or a KDE app, or do you have like more of a Java style where you have an app that looks?
It's more of a jar. It's not. It's kind of like a bundle.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know what the sizes are myself. So I'm not the main person doing them, but so I haven't had a chance to really dive deep in everything on that stuff. But it will probably be a little bit larger now, and hopefully over time it gets smaller. So let me ask you guys. Okay.
So xdg-app, like its focus is for making desktop applications. Is that right? Like,
it's
because like we have these other, like you mentioned, these other like container runtime, Docker, Rocket, whatever. So I don't know anything about xdg-app. That's why I came.
Oh, right.
I
So
never heard about it
yeah,
before, and I don't know anything about underlying. And then now you're only showing pictures of like of it in action. You're not even, and I don't know anything about like what is really going on under the hood and what it's
Right,
for.
right. And after this, I can show you. There's a series of places I can show you. It's a lot more complex to explain to a broad audience, so I don't want to. And I'm not fully competent of trying to explain it. That's so. But I can sit with you. And I can show you how that stuff works underneath. If that's all right with you.
Yeah, I mean that would. I feel like I know more about it to see if I want to use it or not.
Absolutely, and we are working on a conference built around that, and that is specifically to create a forum to convert your apps to an xdg-app. So last year we converted LibreOffice to xdg-app, painfully. And somebody also recently did Blender. So, like I said, they're not, like Blender is not.
So you guys, most GNOME, or I just call it GNOME.
It's okay, no
Because
worries.
you guys
I know
have
what you're talking about.
right? You have a footprint,
Yeah.
like a genome, genetic footprint. But
I never thought of it that way.
So most of your internal projects are using this xdg app now, or? Like
The
most
core
of-
apps are being converted, not all of them, but they're
Okay.
being converted, yeah.
So that might be the best place for me to sandbox the Sandbox environment, or
Mhm.
sandbox the application.
There's a thing on GitHub where they've been, the metadata used to create the Sandbox applications are being stored there. So you kind of feed it the xdg-app and it builds. If you ever looked at, it's a little bit like how I've ever used the Arch user repositories.
Yeah, I use them.
It's a little something like that within where you have a JSON file with a bunch of stuff in there, and it just sort of gives directives because you have to tell it which part of that platform, right? Because it's encapsulated. That's why. So that's why I don't want to go into great depth because I don't know fully aware, but I can kind of give you a broad overview that it's sort of something like that. A lot of that is hidden because things like GNOME Builder will just simply, you load up your source code and you just hit build and it handles all of that xdg stuff. It's not even, you won't even see it. So it comes out and it comes out with a bundle.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, we kind of work on something similar, using a different set of technologies. So that's part of why I'm interested in this.
Yeah. We're, like I said, the conference we're going to do is really going to be focused on converting people to using xdg-app, but also we're working on, I guess what I said, I was talking about user space engineering, meaning working with people in the kernel community, working with large group of software projects like LibreOffice, Firefox, and so forth, and trying to create a good, cohesive application story, as well as working with like graphics drivers, Vulkan, all those kind of things. One thing that kind of lacks in today's application is we've been very passive as far as desktops go. And so we want to be much more aggressive with more targets. Like let's say, for instance, we want to improve the power story, for instance. If you're using a Linux laptop, we should be at least as good as Windows or OS X, if not better, right? So there are certain things we want to do that way, and so improving the entire application story is something we really want to do, and we're creating a vehicle. So GNOME project wants to lead, because if we sit still, we get irrelevant, even if we're by not doing anything, right? Because today things are moving to web apps, or when I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm building a web app, or I'm using this." So we're in danger of people going to web apps or using OS X as their development platform, and we don't want to abandon the user space part of Linux, because it's something that's important, especially for a free software project. You want to make sure that normal users are using a free software platform. So we need to make sure that we're relevant. Yes?
Kind of, since we start the apps different, the space on the disk I assume is different. What kind of access do these applications have to as resources? I'm thinking like in the case of security, what kind of control do we have to sandbox these apps, or maybe just for access control? Because with every application we can decide what it can access and who gets to run and all that.
So when you start, when you decide what your accesses are, so it starts at the very beginning. So when you're building the metadata, you say, okay, this application needs. It's sort of like how Android, when you see it, it's like, okay, this application needs access to the display. It needs access to this part of the file system. So you have to do it at the very beginning. So it's not a dynamic process where you run it and it goes, hey, can I have access to the? It doesn't work that way. You have to do it. You have to play it out at the beginning. Does that sort of answer your question?
I was just thinking about along SE Linux lines too. Does it use any sort of access demanding or access control? You know?
I don't think it does.
Okay.
No.
Thanks.
We are. I mean, one of the things we like KD bus and things like that is one of those where we want to do the security context switch, because sometimes we do need to switch to something else, and so it's one of the pieces. So a lot of the stuff has, we've had people like Leonard Pottering and others looking at it and coming with that. So part of that whole KD bus thing is part of that story, which recently failed. So they're gone back to the drawing board.
I'm just thinking about if you had, this might be good if you had computers that people were using that, a lot of us, we're not the normal computer users. Everyone here, we're generally,
I'm one of you, so
programmers
I
and
know.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But computers for everyone else, been able to kind of sandbox these applications, kiosks, that kind of stuff, where you want to have maybe a little bit more control.
Right.
The application doesn't have as much access to the rest of the file system.
Right.
If this wouldn't be a better way of going some of that.
Absolutely, especially things like ATMs.
Yeah.
They all need very restricted control. So absolutely, yes.
Library computers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. I think that's one of the attractions is that you're doing it with that, is that you have something of that nature, and but it's easy to set up as opposed to some complicated create your own distro, and that you don't want to go off into the weeds. So okay. Any other questions? So go.
Yeah, so because this thing is container oriented, and you guys are talking about like.
Yeah, it's not
Docker,
strictly a
you're
container because
you're talking about like, you mentioned Docker, these other things like, could we talk more about what your container is? And
So it's not strictly a container, right? A container, at least in the classic Linux container, is a specific memory address, right? You're segmenting it in a way. You're putting barriers, right? You're putting barriers there, and then the app runs within the barrier.
the
That's how
barriers are
yeah, that's how Docker works.
Namespaces? Or
Yeah, namespaces.
So yeah, like if you use those terms, then
Yeah.
you can kind of get
Yeah.
an
So.
understanding of it. So is this thing running in a certain namespace, or it's not? Like
It's not. It's running. All right. Let me make sure I know this correctly, because, as I said, I'm not the maintainer or anything else. So, as I understand it, it creates sort of a view, right, within a file system, using bind mounts and various other things to show a view of the file system that it could see, right, and then this xdg-app kind of provides that view. So it runs inside, like if you do, what's the command? Chroot, right? It would be like running in a chroot. But I don't understand the devices part, unfortunately. But it would be in a chrooted environment where it can only see these things. So it's not the same because containers, you see it as a machine, right? You're not seeing it as a machine. So Docker shows like you're running like a full machine. I mean, it's sort of a lightweight VM, right? A VM is an entire machine in x86, but Docker is sort of looks like it's a machine because it's just it's booting a kernel inside a particular namespace, right? So that's the difference is that we're not doing it that way. It's a very specific kind of curated environment.
Okay.
It's using C groups.
So that,
Yes.
so it uses C groups, and then I'll just think about it for a second and ask my question.
Did you have a question?
So is it running as root when you run it
No.
to install everything, or can everything be run as the user?
It's running as a user because if it runs
So
as
how
root,
does it
then
set
then you don't have the device.
Yeah, but then how does it set the permissions on all the devices and everything? You can't do that if
I
you're root.
I don't know, but I'll find
Yeah.
out for you.
So some part of it does have to be
There's got to be some
root.
root helper in there.
Yeah, and then hopefully.
Yeah, there's a helper. There's a helper
Okay.
binary, xdg helper app helper.
Okay.
that I
And so
think
that's
that-
probably where the KD bus stuff was. supposed to
Right,
come
because
in.
it asked
so
me
that
to
it
do a
could-
set UID. In
Yeah.
fact, it needed a Linux namespace.
Yeah.
Arch Linux it did. So
Okay.
it may be doing some kernel help to do that,
Yeah.
but I had to do set UID
Okay.
root to make that happen. So
Yeah.
that's probably where its connection is with setting permissions and so forth. Because I couldn't do it without doing that.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
Jess,
No, I'm not gonna.
you're not gonna have.
Is anyone working yet on the stuff about how do you solve the security problem? Do you set rules about what things that go in the software store can do in the container, what they must take from the host system? Is someone working on that, or are you just doing the tech right now?
I think we're just doing the tech. As far as I understand, the runtime part is done, and now they're working on the sandboxing
Okay.
issue itself.
So they haven't got to the point of working about the policy about what you can put in your.
No, I
sandboxes.
don't think it is yet. So as far as I know,
Right.
those are great questions, and I would be happy to get back to you and do that. I do have some questions for you all, because this is my chance to interact with people who are interested. Where do you feel the desktops are today in Linux? I mean, you've been to a couple sessions. Where do you think is the relevance for projects like GNOME?
Well, I think a lot of desktops, I know in our house, they're kind of turning into servers.
Okay.
You know, everybody's wants data, and we've got our own file system.
So how do you interact with them?
Somebody's upstairs with their Android and all kinds of stuff.
Okay, so it's sort of like you put all your like media and everything on your machines, but then you're using your Android everything else to consume the content,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I do something similar. What other changes have you guys noticed?
So to clarify your question, are you talking about specifically us as users, more general users? or
Us as users who are going to conferences, and where are people writing about? I mean, what was interesting to you in all these talks? Because you don't see, like as I was saying, you don't see desktop talks as much, right? So, with us not being out there, how has computing changed for you in that way?
It kind of depends what it's being used for. Mostly consuming content, mostly generating content. For consuming, like mobile devices, tablets, phones, etc., work beautifully. But as soon as you start doing something, trying to do something productive, like creating something, I find desktop to be indispensable. Granted, it's all mobile desktops, but still.
But even, for instance, even coding, which is sort of but it's like if you look at GitHub, it's got their online editor. You can do it all in the browser.
It depends on what you develop. If you're doing web development, sure, but if you're doing native development, nope.
So there's a certain amount, there's a certain you can go with web apps. that before you hit a wall, right?
I'd say that web apps in general kind of suck. Really, they do. And high five. And I think that they'll get better, but maybe it's a lack of standards. When we have a desktop application, we say there's going to be a file menu and there's going to be a load thing. And it's going to be the same place every single time. And you click the close back gadget and it closes. And all the regular apps until Google comes along and changes Chrome or something like that, they generally work the way we expect them to. And with web apps, people just do whatever the heck they feel like, and sometimes the user interface is really quite bad.
Okay,
It's
so
not just that.
the interface changes from
Yes.
app to app, so there's no
But it's not
consistency.
just that. It's also the lack of, there are certain things that you cannot do in the web apps, whatever, whatsoever. They're just either completely impossible, just browsers don't support those things that you want to do at all.
And you have a back button, which screws everything up.
Well, there's definitely, so if I just turn around, there's definitely some of that inconsistency even on our free software desktop, right? If you're running a GNOME app and then you switch to a KDE app, they're two completely different contexts, right?
The file menu will still be there, and I'll still have the same options, right?
Yeah,
Still
even,
have some guidance.
I mean, that's one of the things, right? Is part of the reason why GNOME gets a lot of flack is because we set a particular look and feel. We don't allow a lot of play because, for instance, at some point, let's say themes, for instance. If you're an application developer, you spend an incredible amount of time trying to make your app look good. And then some theme comes along, and you load it, and it changes the fonts, and everything that you spent designing is now out the window because you didn't design it for, I don't know, some cartoon-esque font or whatever people put it. And then somebody walks by and is like, "What is that app? It looks ugly." That's out in here in professional application land, right? A lot of that is trying to create a human interface guidelines to make sure that so that you know that that they need to conform to it. So, yes.
I think it's funny that you're a GNOME developer using Arch Linux. I used GNOME for a long time. 2 to 3, I liked 3. I thought it was beautiful. I remember everybody was making a big stink, and I was like, yeah, it's missing some things from GNOME 2, but I thought it was really a step forward. But then, when I wanted to do some hacking on my desktop, I found Arch Linux was where I got information from
Yes, it's got the most excellent documentation ever.
About GNOME and stuff, or what I wanted to hack on. Eventually, I got so involved tweaking my desktop, but I went the other direction, where I moved to using the i3 desktop, right? Really small. But then I still use GNOME projects and tools run on top of my desktop. So you asked where we were going with our desktop, and I don't think I'm your regular.
Right, you went to a trial and window manager.
One thing that I'd like to do, and maybe I should move back to Debian or something, but I kind of like Arch now, is I think for some reason I stopped using a desktop launcher. So now I don't have I would like the flexibility to use GNOME and to use i3.
Right.
Choose when I want to use one of those desktops, because I feel like
But
different
that's
purposes.
creating a very complex thing where you're trying to move from one to another. They're not. They have two different goals, right? That i3
So
is a very different thing.
Yeah, I mean it's this tiling window manager, and it's very focused on these keyboard shortcuts and some flexibility and stuff. But then when I go give a presentation to my coworkers or something, maybe I want all this. Maybe I want some flashy rendering, nice fonts, all these
Well,
things.
but then you would just
Log
log
out.
out and log back in with a GNOME session, right? Or something
Right,
like
yeah,
that.
that's why I'm not using a session launcher right now. So like,
So you use exinit something and so forth.
yeah,
I
I'm
get
start
it.
X, like I moved backwards all the way back like a long time ago, yeah, so that's where I'm at with my desktop. And then some really cool desktop applications out there, like I like I don't know if you use the CopyQ clipboard manager or something like that, but that's been almost indispensable for me as a desktop
Right.
application.
So you had a question.
Just about the desktop. When I was in college the first time, all computer classes were in a computer lab. And computer labs are not very friendly places. They're very sterile and not very conducive to diverse users.
There's always an
and-
air of desperation.
Exactly.
Computer lab.
And when I went back to college again, and everyone was when everyone was sitting around coffee shops using their laptops to collaborate, it was such a different, more diverse environment. And we
Much
opened
warmer.
up a lot more doors.
Mm-hmm.
The downside of that, of course, is that there's Moore's law is going so much of the potential of the power of anything that we're creating is going not toward making it better, but making it work better on with less resources. And there is a loss there. It's making it run lighter weight is a loss.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're right, there's having access to the power that a desktop provides.
Right. There's only so much you can do, especially if if you're, the pendulum always swings when you have new input devices, right? Right now they're kind of well known, but once you start working on, let's say those little things like Google Glass type stuff you plug in, then it changes again, it swings back, because there's no way a browser running is not going to have as well of a connection to these kind of peripherals than if you're directly connected.
Oh, sure.
Right, because it's still running inside a sandbox environment in the browser, so we can't always allow it to have access to everything, right? So those are we trust it more when we're running it on our application than through a browser. It's what I socially feel.
So back to the container talk, or
And back
you're
to me
saying that this
screwing
thing
up.
is not it's not a container, right?
Yeah.
So like it's not part of the Open Container Initiative.
Actually, we are trying to be part of Open Container Initiative.
Then you probably are trying to create something that is
We're
a container
trying-
and you're not
Maybe,
defining
but
it.
I'm not sure what exactly they're trying to do with that. All I know is that I read something. This is from Fedora Workstation blog. So about wanting to be compliant.
Do you work for who do you work for?
I work for Intel.
For Intel.
Okay, so OCI is basically just saying it's a tarball, and you've got this basic root directory structure, everything's underneath something, and then you got a metadata file in there with it.
So
That's pretty much all it is.
Okay.
It's
Then
that way you
then-
can look at the metadata and say, well, this is
was-
what I've got in here. I can blast it out into a chroot
Okay.
and then feed that to Docker or to
Okay,
QEMU
okay.
or
Okay.
or
So
whatever.
To Rocket or whatever
Okay.
container,
Yeah, then that's-
whatever container runtime
Yeah.
you want to launch your thing in. So
yeah.
like
So
we want to take your
I'm
container.
going to show you the blog where it shows how that sets up, and you can see where that plays out, because
And it-
that is exactly
And
what it is.
it's all on GitHub on the OCI website, GitHub repo,
Right,
all
and
the
so like
all
I
the description
I
for it.
personally would see it as a strength of having interoperability.
Sure, absolutely.
between
And
the
Docker knows
container
what we're doing too. I mean, those guys know.
or Rocket.
All right,
Yeah.
yeah. Those guys are aware of this effort, so there's overlap, but they're not the same, right? So we're not in competition
Yeah.
with them at all.
There's not really a whole lot of difference between most of them because it's, you're chrooting a tree and you're launching something inside of it,
Yeah.
whether it's a full kernel or if it's a systemd or
Mhm.
some other init process.
So this GNOME development that you're demoing, like xdg-app, you're using it to pull this latest build down and run it on your system. What are you guys using as the build daemon? What's building the software that you're what's building the images that you're pulling down?
xdg-app itself is doing the build as far as it's got directives that it's doing. I could show you again. I'll show you in the blog post.
So there's an xdg-app like server build daemon that's running that takes requests, or are you building with Jenkins or something?
No, we're not building with Jenkins. So the way it works is we have. You saw that there's an SDK kit, so it's built out in the server.
I didn't see much. Okay. I didn't even see like the URL to the project to where I could get the.
Well, like I said, I can show it to you, and I can give you a much more personal view of the thing.
Okay. I feel like.
If anybody else is interested, I'm happy to do that as well. So, okay, I got 10 minutes.
Maybe you just want to show everybody that stuff because like.
Okay.
Or I don't know what else everybody's sticking around for, but
sure.
I'd like to know more. I guess I want the technical talk, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, you want the technical talk, but I can't. I could do some of it, but I'm not living in that world. As I said, I'm more of an engagement PR type person. You're asking the marketing guy to give you the technical talk.
Yeah.
But I know where to go, and I can certainly assure you.
Or you can just show me the link to it and maybe the project.
Sure. Let me.
Well, I think you use an OS tree for part of that, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. It's Colin's project, and that builds everything on the server side, and then sets up the Git tree to pull it.
Yep. So we have an entire blog of tutorial that goes over through all of that. So Alex is the person who is the maintainer. Let me make sure. Give me a moment here, and I'll try to find the blog. I had that kind of queued up because I was sort of expecting somebody to when I wrote these slides, I was like, okay, do I talk about the SDK kit and the building and everything? And I figured it was harder for me to add that. I was worried it was run out of time, and second, I couldn't speak authoritatively on it.
Sure.
Right. I'm not gonna come up here and speak something that I don't know.
Right.
So my plan was to exactly point out.
Well, so like the questions that I came out here, like I think I came to this lecture because I was like, do I want to use xdg-app?
Sure.
To containerize like the kind of apps that I'm trying to build, or just Sandbox like. This isn't really for this is only for distributing an app for the purpose of testing it, right? Like it's not for the purpose of actually launching and running the app on your desktop, or it is.
Yes. Yeah.
It was originally conceived of as something to help with testing, but now it is exactly that intent.
It is intended for.
The idea is that you run GNOME software and you'll be able to download Sandbox apps from it.
Yeah,
and
then run it.
Standard application delivery mechanism.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
I'm trying to evaluate, like, do I want to use xdg-app to, like let's say, I can talk about the applications that I develop, right? Like, they probably depend a lot on some other kind of application, right? Like my application might launch in some other like Java container thing, like a Glassfish or something like that. It could be like a web server that's a Java app,
right?
And I want to containerize it, right? And I want to build it in a CI fashion, and I want to be able to pull those builds out, like have my developers pull those builds out from like a repository with something like xdg-app maybe, or maybe I want to, or maybe Jenkins is the thing I'm going to use to build it, but do I still want to think about using XDG as this thing to launch and distribute my application or not?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I know it works well. It sounds like it works well for your project. Will it work well for my project? That's like what I come to this.
And
look at your
and
presentation
that's
to figure out.
and that's part of what I've been. I mean, why I want to create a forum for precisely that, right? Because I don't know. They may not know all the parameters that are into porting somebody's app. So it's something like if you go through the process of porting it, okay, what's the weakness? Oh, we don't have that. We're missing this. You know, those kind of things. Because it's still work in progress, right? We're focused on our own apps, but we haven't looked at everything, right? What about Python apps? Or you know, there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there that we don't all know. And so,
right, I mean, like, are your apps, like, is it defining, like, specific languages? Like, you know, like, we're not,
because
we're going to be distributing C applications, C binaries, we're going to be doing C++, we're going to be doing Python, we're going to be you can distribute Go along with this. Like, what, I don't really know from what you're showing me, like, what I can use it for, except for getting your sources right now or running your applications.
Right. So okay, so let me try to see if I can go through. I'll have to.
But the fact that you're trying to become part of the OCI, I could see that. I could see parts of your project might be valuable to even things outside of you know, your specific GNOME project applications.
Right.
So KDE applications or even applications.
There's already people working with KDE for a KDE runtime and SGK. Yeah. So, you know. So here's an example of a. I think I got 3 minutes. So, okay. And this is just a script. It's just a hello world bash script, okay? That uses. I don't even know if I can read it, but let me. That's going to be a bit of a problem. So, can you see? Can you read that actually?
Yep.
Okay. I can't, so I'm going to have to. So right now, again, they're using the GNOME nightly build runtime, right? And so here you can see that we're downloading the key, we're adding the repo, and then we're installing the platform. And this time we're doing a particular one, 3.20, all right? Then we start creating the application, right? In this case, this is a simple bash script that says, hello world from a sandbox. So after that, you need to create a metadata file, right? And that keeps a namespace with org test hello, right? We're using a namespace called org test hello. And we specify a runtime and then the name of the script. So far, so good?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So the next thing after that you have to do is then you're creating the kind of file system, the bundle. And that is, so you see this after files bin export. So now you see you're trying to create the view of the file system that is running. All right. And so then you use this xdg-app thing to create a repo. This is where this OS tree stuff starts coming in because you're actually creating an OS tree.
Right. This is kind of analogous to like Docker build kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And so this is so now you've initialized a local area, kind of like it, and then you use the xdg-app to export it. Then this is where we run the program,
right, yeah.
and then it prints hello from the Sandbox. So, you guys,
Somebody's
Okay, or what?
Well, you're done for time.
Okay, we're done for time. So,
That's
if people want to keep, can I keep going or?
Yeah.
We got 15 minutes to get the next one in.
Okay, all right. Then I'm gonna have to close up. So, but come by over. I'll give you the list of the logs.